A while ago, I built a small vampire crab ecosystem in a 5-gallon aquarium with an experimental background made out of bamboo skewers and clay. Since that ended up working way better than I had expected, and the tank ran its course without any issues, it was an easy decision to upscale it to something bigger. Just like in the smaller version, I started this project with a scaffold that I had made a few days earlier by gluing bamboo skewers together. Once it was dry, I laid the tank on its back and stuck the scaffold in place with a few dabs of silicone in the corners, just to prevent it sliding down once I've applied the clay. Once the silicone was dry, I covered the entire scaffold with a nice thick layer of clay. This tank is 50 by 40 by 30 centimeters, and I used about 4 kilos of clay to cover the upper 3/4 of the tank. I spent quite a long time adding hollows, ridges, ledges, and all sorts of other stuff to give it a nice natural look. I've made a lot of vampire crab paludariums over the years, but this is only the second time that I've used dragonstone, which is quite fitting as it goes really well with this background material. As always, the first part of the process is to create a soil and water barrier using the dragonstone. I like to start with the bigger bits first, then slowly fill in the gaps around them with smaller stuff. The aim is to fill as many gaps as possible and to make the next step a lot easier. It doesn't need to be watertight, just stable with the biggest gaps closed so the clay balls don't float forwards once you fill with water. Behind this layer, we add the substrate or the drainage layer, and as always, I'm using Leaker clay balls since it's cheap and lightweight. You don't have to use Leaker, you can use gravel, crushed lava rock, or anything that isn't too densely packed. When adding this layer, make sure you build it high enough to keep your future soil layer out of the water. The last thing you want is to fill your tank only to find that your soil is now sitting in water. On top of the substrate layer, I'm adding a barrier material to keep the soil from falling into the Leaker layer. I'm using coconut matting here since I have plenty of it left over from other builds, but you can use window screening, weed matting, or anything similar, so long as it allows water to pass through quite easily. Since this coconut matting is quite thick, I'm also adding a few more bits of dragonstone on top to hide the front edge. Now that the entire foundation for the paludarium is ready, I'm just going to pile in some soil on top. I'm using organic potting mix that doesn't contain any fertilizers, and over the years I've used a ton of different soils and different soil mixes, from bonsai soil to dirt from the garden, dirt from the forest, and some sand and gravel and clay mixes. Every single one of these has worked well, as they all allow the crabs to dig little burrows. On top of the dirt layer, I'm adding this stump that I dug out of my yard a while ago. I've had it sitting on my balcony for quite a few weeks, so most of the critters that might have been living inside it would have vacated. Though doing this only reduces the odds, it doesn't eliminate them entirely. And since it has a few flat spots from where I cut it out with the saw, I'm going to cover these later with some rocks, plants, moss, and other natural bits of hardscape. The plant selection I chose for this tank was quite minimal to start with, and since it's been over a year now, the list of plants I used for this project is long gone. But I know a lot of you guys are plant experts, so I have no doubt you'll be able to identify them pretty quickly, and once all of the IDs are in, I'll make sure to add them to the description and a pinned comment as well. The slabs of moss that I'm using here are also from the previous tank which I just broke down, so they're supercharged with springtails, worms, and all sorts of other beneficial microfauna. I like to reuse as much stuff as possible from older tanks because it gives the entire ecosystem a nice big boost. Same goes for the entire leaker substrate. It's covered in beneficial bacteria, which will give the nitrogen cycle in the water section a nice big kickstart. With pretty much all of the land section complete, it's finally time to add the substrate for the water section. Generally when I'm building a vampire crab tank, I'll either use sand, small grain gravel, or a mix of small grain gravel, sand, and some larger stuff. Either of them works fine, though I find sand, especially if it's really fine grained, can get a little bit dirty a little bit quickly. Though that isn't a problem for the crabs at all. If you're planning on breeding vampire crabs, it's best to have a nice layer of mulm in the bottom of your water section and lots of decaying leaf litter scattered across the surface of the land area. And last of all, it's time to fill the tank with water. If it's your first time setting up a tank for vampire crabs, I highly suggest waiting about a month or longer before adding your crabs, and while you're waiting, add some springtails, earthworms, isopods, and some snails like ram's horn snails to the water section. This will help establish your tank's biome so that everything is ready for the crabs to move in. Since I do this very regularly, and I have reused materials from other tanks that are already cycled, I'm going to be adding my crabs after a couple of days. These guys are Geoshisama Halloween, and one guy is a little bit beat up, but he'll molt and regrow his limbs before too long. At this point, most people will be wondering about a filter, and you don't actually need to use one. They're completely optional in a tank like this, though you do need to use aquatic plants like salvinia or even duckweed to help filter the water naturally, though any aquatic plant will work perfectly fine. A couple of weeks later, nothing has gone to plan, and this tank has currently been invaded by apocalypse mold. The only way that I know to stop it is to cut it out and remove whatever it's touching. Judging from where it started though, I think it might have come from a half-eaten dried mealworm that one of the crabs left inside the crown of a fern. From there, it just started to spread everywhere, and there's almost no stopping it. As a precaution, I caught the two crabs, removed the fern, and cut out everything it was touching. Then, I waited, and I waited over a year.